next speaker will discuss the role and possibilities of the building industry for mitigating climate change and biodiversity loss. Please help me welcome the Professor of Sustainable Construction at Aalto University's Department of Architecture and the Serial Ministerial Advisor at the Finnish Ministry of Environment, Matti Kuittinen.
Good morning, good morgon, hyvää huomenta. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here in Oslo. And in the spirit of intellectual interval training, we are going to change from the rhythm of the previous very energetic and information-packed presentation to something different. We are going to talk about something that might sound a bit more serious and maybe slightly worrying, but we will end up with a positive and optimistic note. He is Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of United Nations. And whenever we heard about United Nations, maybe we think about things like peacekeeping or, negotiations between countries and things like this. And therefore it's quite interesting, at least to me it's quite touching as well, that he, in his speech that was about the state of the planet, said the following: making peace with nature is the defining task of the 21st century. So normally UN is like negotiating between countries that are in war together, like we have terrible things going on in Ukraine and in Sudan and in many other places. But still, the Secretary General of UN says that no, actually making peace with nature is the thing that we should focus at. Why is he saying this? Well, the reason for this is that we, of course, are consuming a lot of resources, and by consuming them, we are not meaning to be mean, or we don't mean to do bad things to anybody. We're just using them for our comfort and maybe pleasure. But along with this consumption of resources, we are causing huge collateral damage, unfortunately. And therefore, Antonio Guterres uses quite strong wording when he describes this collateral damage that we are causing. He's saying that humanity is waging war on nature. This is suicidal. Biodiversity is collapsing. Ecosystems are disappearing before our eyes. Apocalyptic fires and floods, cyclones and hurricanes are increasingly the new normal. And he concludes by saying, let's be clear, human activities are at the root of our descent towards chaos. Very strong words, very serious message from the Secretary General. What can we do? Let's first examine the concept of planetary boundaries, and let's then connect that to the potential of the construction sector of trying to ease the pressure on our precious home planet. This is a diagram that many of us are familiar with. It describes the 9 planetary boundaries. It was developed by Stockholm Resilience Institute already a decade ago. So if we read it from 12 o'clock, we can see that there is a sector called climate change, and it shows red color, and the further outwards this red color goes, the more we have exceeded the safe limits of our planet. So in terms of climate change, we are on the danger zone already. But when we shift to the next one, novel entities describing new chemical compounds and their unknown impacts to the nature, we are even further in the danger zone. Then there are some things in which there are positive changes. For instance, ozone depletion. In Montreal in 1980s, humanity made a deal with itself and with its future that, hey, let's start cutting these freons and other coolants that we are using in our equipments. And as a result, the ozone depletion is now looking much more positive than it was in 1980. So that's a proof that we can indeed make a change for better. Then there are things that we know that are there, but that we can't quantify. One of those is the atmospheric aerosol loading. Aerosols are a tricky thing. Sometimes they are good and sometimes they are bad. And it's been even said that if we would clean the air of Asian megacities from all the pollutants and aerosols that are there, we would, on the other hand, improve dramatically people's health. But on the other hand, we would take climate change a couple of steps forward, because the aerosols are sort of masking climate change because they are reflecting sunlight. So they are helping the cities to be cooler even though they are very harmful for our health. So it's difficult to quantify where we are in this sector. Then regarding ozone acidification, we are not yet on the danger zone, looks good still. But then in terms of biogeochemical flows of phosphorus and nitrogen, we are way off. And this is something that the agriculture is mostly accountable for. Then looking at freshwater change, we are on the danger zone already, regrettably, as goes for land system change and for biosphere integrity. There we have launched the 6th mass extinction of species. It's a depressing graph, I admit. But if we want to do something, we should identify that what is our agency and what can we as professionals of the construction industry do to change this picture to look better. And I argue that maybe the construction sector has more possibilities of doing everyday decisions that help to take off the pressure from our precious home planet than any other sector. Let's examine why I say this. Well, the current consumption of resources in construction makes it very hard to limit global warming below 2 degrees. The figures that you see in most sustainable construction seminars look like this. Our sector is using half of annually extracted raw materials. It's consuming some 40% of primary energy, causing over 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. And when we add all these up, there is not a chance that we could keep the global warming under 1.5 degrees. So we need to do something, and what the IPCC, or the International Panel for Climate Change, has suggested is that we should cut from 80 to 90% of emissions by 2050. That's a dramatic change. 80 to 90%. Just think about the chair or seat where you are seated at the moment. How could you design that seat in a manner that would cause 90% less emissions? How would you approach it? Would you maybe use less material? Would you change the material base? Would you try to make it almost without energy? Or would you even consider going to a flea market and buying something that has already been made? So the dramatic changes that are ahead of our sector are, according to many researchers, poorly understood. Because if we were serious in meeting this goal, it would mean super, super, super big changes to everything we do, from the design to maintenance to a disassembly of the built environment. Well, but we know how to make things better, right? However, there are things that are increasing the consumption of resources for construction as we speak. So first of them is quite easy to understand, the population growth. We are going towards 10 or 11 billion by the end of the ongoing century. Even if the birth rates are going down, which is a good thing, there are just so many of us here on this planet that there will be more people sharing the limited resources. So that's a pressure for all industries that are consuming resources, right? But what's interesting in terms of the construction sector is that when we look at the per capita floor areas in different countries, there are trends that are challenging. Here on the left-hand side, you can see what is an average per capita floor area from Australian 80 square meters to Cambodian 10 square meters per capita. And on the right-hand side, you can see that how the trends are evolving from 1970s towards today. So in many of those countries where there is population growth, also the per capita floor area is increasing. And furthermore, the household size are decreasing. So the number of people who are sharing the same apartment, it's getting smaller. So these trends, population growth, increasing per capita floor areas, and decreasing household size, are all pushing the consumption of resources for construction on a higher rate than the bare population growth. And interestingly, when we examine the material intensity in, say, residential construction over a period of 100 years, we can see that from the beginning of the 20th century to close today, there is hardly any improvement. We are still consuming more or less the same amount of stuff than we used to do 100 years ago. So we need to improve. But because of the trends that I just described, it seems that we are about to consume quite much more material by 2050. From the 40 billion tons of 2010, we are heading towards 90 billion tons by 2050. Okay, so these were consumption-related trends that are increasing the resource use in construction, but then there are environment-related trends that are doing the same. I'll just take two examples. The first is the rate of natural disasters. It looks like this. From the beginning of the 20th century, it's gone high quite much. And all of these natural disasters come with repair needs, which is self-evident. In the previous presentation, we saw some of examples of, making cities better for flooding. But for instance, just the unpredictable weather during winter months here in the Nordic countries is adding repair needs to our roads and infrastructure quite considerably. So increasing turbulence in the weather is also increasing resource need. And then furthermore, rising sea levels. In this graph, there is a description of how many millions of people are going to be affected by rising sea levels by the end of the ongoing century. In China and India, from 10 to 50 million. And then when you read the small print, it says that this is actually quite conservative assumption, and it does not take into account ice sheet instability. Small words, big meaning. Last autumn, I had a possibility of talking to John Schellnhuber, maybe the most well-known as climate scientist of our age. And he said that in his view, there is not a chance of limiting the sea level rise under 2 meters. So he said that 2 meters is going to happen anyway. The question is more like how rapidly the 2 meter sea level rise is going to happen, and if it's going to stop there. For instance, if we lose the Greenlandic ice sheet, the sea level rise is going to be from 6 to 7 meters. And according to some glacier scientists, we already might have gone beyond that tipping point. Just imagine what that would do not only to the infrastructure, but the global economy if the value of properties and cities close to sea shore would vanish. So, there are trends that increase the consumption of resources for construction. And this means that everybody is going to have a smaller piece of cake. Doesn't sound nice, but inevitably ahead of us there is a need to limit the use of resources. And now we come to the interesting and important and some slightly philosophical question: who should do it? Who has the responsibility of doing it? There are 3 ways of looking at this traditionally. Either we can look at historical responsibility in terms of consumption of resources and developing emissions. Then we can look at capacity. Who can lower the consumption of resources? Who has that sort of skill and competence? And thirdly, we can talk about equality. Wouldn't it be fair to let the people who are living in poverty to raise their living standards to a decent level? And talking here in the Nordics, I think that we could all agree that, yeah, we at least we have a capacity of doing this. And maybe we can develop solutions that give hope for the rest of the planet and really show the way of how does it look to live in a good living environment of the future. And therefore, as we started today, with the message of Antonio Guterres saying that the defining task of our century would be to make peace with nature, I would like to suggest 3 things from my perspective that could help us towards that goal. And the first message is that I think that it's about the time that we seriously reconsider the needs for construction. I mean, we just can't afford to build so much. And furthermore, I don't think that with any novel technology there is a chance of building our way out of the crisis. We cannot address resource consumption by consuming more. If we just look at materials, the production of steel, plastics, aluminum, and cement, mostly used in construction, are going to cause over 900 gigatons of CO2 emissions, and when we compare this to the threshold of 1.5 degree warming, it's almost 2 times as much. So, if we put our factories who are producing these materials to run on zero carbon energy, and to do that on a very energy and resource efficient manner, we'd end up in somewhere around 650 gigatons. Still too much, and no emission allocations for other necessities such as food or clothes or traveling, let alone the important things of YouTube and Spotify. That wouldn't be a nice life, would it? And the only way to go below the line and to stay in the maximum quota for the heavy industries would be to take into use radical measures of circular economy. Now, what's radical? It could be, for instance, 3D printing, or maybe not. Maybe it could be like reusing components in construction. Or maybe even more radical would be to do nothing, just use what we already have. And now, speaking as an architect, I know that this makes totally no sense for anyone's business logic. I don't get money from turning my clients not to build anything. They won't pay me for that. And I know that nobody's paying for the construction company anything if they are refusing to build a building. But just looking at the consumption of resources on our planet, it's inevitable that we need to reconsider the needs for construction. Then, secondly, we need to improve the resilience of the built environment. The turbulent weather, of course, is adding to the repair needs, but it's also affecting the price of real estates. And that has a consequence to, say, many pension funds as well. If we lost the Greenlandic ice sheet, as I described, we would cause a sea level rise of 6 to 7 meters. If we lost all glaciers, if there was a runaway greenhouse gas effect, this is how the coastline of Europe would look like. And the Earth has been like this in the past, when there were no glaciers. But it would be a totally different world. It would be a world of also political and societal unrest. And therefore, as my last proposal is that we should question also our anthropocentric construction culture. Nowadays, as said, we are consuming half of annually extracted raw materials to construction. And we are extracting these from the habitats of other neighbors who are living here on the same planet. Now, could we, instead of being the #1 consumer on the globe, could we imagine ourselves being just another neighbor, maybe a nice neighbor on the planet that we are sharing together? Ultimately, the environment is what keeps us alive. And then we can also ask, if we approach this narrative, we can also start asking philosophically very interesting yet very difficult questions, such as, which home is more important, my third summer cottage or a bird's nest? And if we say that mine is more important, what's my position of saying so? So, 3 things. We should reconsider the needs for construction, we should improve the resilience, and we should question the anthropocenic construction culture. How shall we do that? I argue that we need to work together. 3 parties. We should work with nature, with artificial intelligence, and with humans. And interestingly, there might be a way of utilizing the capacity of AI to better understand the needs of nature, because there is no human bias probably between these. And if we manage to do this, then I argue that we might have a chance of building within the planetary boundaries. Now, I admit that the message that I have been giving this morning has been quite heavy, but I'd like to end up with something that should give us hope. These are the words of Nelson Mandela. Problems of this scale always seem impossible until they are done. So I think that the construction sector can deliver, should deliver, and let's start delivering. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Matti. I'm sure there are plenty of questions. I just remind you that you can use the digital platforms to ask audience questions to Matti as well, as he will be joining the panel. However, I do have just one question before we go on a quick break. Theo talked about AI and how anyone will be able to say, I want a tunnel from there to there. And I'll input these basic metrics for that tunnel or whatever to be built. When I talked to Elena Ashman, who is the head of innovation and AI at Ericsson, she also talked about the importance of AI systems being intent-based, meaning that we as humans put the intent into the AI. How do we ensure that AI isn't used to just gain more money to buy a house away from the rising sea levels?
Well, if I knew the exact answer for this, maybe I would be running a company who would be doing that. Maybe I would give a policymaker's reply, which is cryptic.
Yeah, because that's what I was aiming for, because you're also on working with these issues.
Yeah, so what we are doing currently in Finland, we are working with machine-readable building codes. And in that work, we have noticed that some of the very basic things that don't appear to be so tricky, like semantic interoperability, are super important, so that we and the machines know what we are talking about when we are talking about a brick or tunnel or a bolt of certain steel grade. So AI can be a great help in defining these sort of basic parameters. It can do these things much faster than humans. But ultimately, of course, it's about the coding ethics, that who develops the algorithms that then evolve in the realm of artificial intelligence. And I think that there we should admit AI into these sessions to listen, to learn, and also to contribute. And as I'm just in a process of making a podcast series that will be launched in the autumn, and one of my guests, in addition to human speakers, was ChatGPT, and I was talking to ChatGPT, trying to challenge her, him, or it to say that where can it work better than us humans? Where should we use our limited brain cells, and where should it put its muscles into use? And quite interesting answers, and it proposed several channels of fruitful collaboration between humans and non-humans, AI included. So let's see what the future brings.
But regulations are part of it, right? We kind of need to regulate it.
Yeah, but I agree. We need to regulate, but since my bread and butter is building regulation, I think that I shouldn't, elaborate too much towards the digital legislation.
Okay, thank you.